This is a homily for the 18th Sunday in Ordinary Time. The first reading comes from the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 1, verse 2, and chapter 2, verses 21 to 23. The second reading comes from St. Paul's letter to the Colossians, chapter 3, verses 1 to 5, and verses 9 to 11. The Gospel comes from the Gospel of St. Luke, chapter 12, verses 13 to 21. To download the text of this homily as a PDF file, go to sundayhomilies.au. In today's Gospel, we continue our journey to Jerusalem with Jesus and his disciples. This is the longest section of Luke's Gospel, and the Sunday lectionary devotes 19 weeks to what Jesus does and says during this journey. But this is more than just a geographical journey from Galilee in the north to Jerusalem in the south. It is also about an inner journey. Jesus is teaching his followers about discipleship, about life in the kingdom of God. Let's quickly review what we have been taught over the past few weeks. We've learnt that as disciples of Jesus, we must be good Samaritans. But discipleship cannot be reduced to that. It is not enough merely to do good things for others. As disciples of Jesus, we must also be inspired and nourished by sitting at the feet of Jesus, like Mary, allowing his word to form, inform, reform, and transform us. Then a lesson on prayer. Jesus teaches his disciples the prayer that we know as the Our Father. And today, a warning about avarice. Jesus says, "Watch and be on your guard against avarice of any kind, for life does not consist in abundance of possessions." The Greek word translated here as avarice is pleonexia. It's a word that describes the greedy desire to have more money, more power, more pleasure, regardless of the moral cost. It is ultimately a form of idolatry because we are worshipping something other than God. The English word worship means literally ascribe worth to. So what do I ascribe ultimate worth to? What do I worship? One way to answer that question is to ask, where, in reality, do I invest my time, talents, money, energy, emotions, and enthusiasm? That, I think, is a fairly reliable guide. The Bible has a word for putting anything or anyone except God at the top of the list. The word is idolatry. In today's second reading, St. Paul tells the Colossians, "Put to death, then, everything in you that is earthly, sexual vice, impurity, passion, evil desires, and greed, which is idolatry." Paul is using that same Greek word that we find in today's Gospel, pleonexia, translated here as greed. And notice that Paul refers to it as idolatry. In today's Gospel, we have the story of the rich fool, a parable found only in Luke's Gospel. The Old Testament reading chosen to complement the Gospel comes from the book of Ecclesiastes, or Qoheleth, as it's called in the Hebrew Bible. The word Qoheleth is derived from the root kahal, which means assembly or congregation. The title Qoheleth refers, in this context, to someone who gathers an audience to share philosophical and theological reflections on life, its meaning and its challenges. The word is commonly translated as teacher, preacher, or convener, all reflecting the idea of someone who leads or addresses an assembly. The Greek word Ecclesiastes is a translation of Koheleth. It means one who convenes an assembly. It is derived from the Greek word ekklesia, which means assembly. Koheleth really has a skeptical and pessimistic view of the world. The tone of the book is one of alienated cynicism and a weary melancholy. The theme repeated throughout the book is the emptiness of human effort. "Vanity of vanities," says the preacher, "vanity of vanities, all is vanity." What does he mean? The English word vanity usually means a disordered self-love or an obsession with one's appearance. That is not what he's talking about here. Koheleth was writing in Hebrew, so what he actually said was hevel hevelim. The word hevel means a breath. Hevel hevelim is the Hebrew superlative form, so the translation is the merest breath. What does that mean? Well, think of your breath. Blow onto the palm of your hand. You feel the breath for a fleeting moment, and then it is gone forever. It's ephemeral, no more than a breath. How even more fleeting and insubstantial is the merest breath. So we toil all our lives. To what end? In the end, it amounts to no more than the merest breath. In other words, utter futility. Vanity of vanities. Robert Alter has translated the Hebrew scriptures into English, and he offers this reflection. The Hebrew hevel probably indicates the flimsy vapour that is exhaled in breathing, invisible except on a cold winter day, and in any case immediately dissipating in the air. If then one wanted to line up the abstractions implied by hevel, it would include not only futility, absurdity, and vanity, but at least insubstantiality, ephemerality, and elusiveness as well. The merest breath. Koheleth is asking, what have you gained from all your work and strain? It is no more than the merest breath. Let's leave the preacher with those thoughts and move on to the rich fool we meet in today's gospel. He's had a bumper wheat crop, which is, of course, a blessing from God. But what is his reaction to such a blessing? He thinks to himself, what am I to do? I have not enough room to store my crops. I will pull down my barns and build bigger ones. And now he can sit back and relax, a wealthy man. My soul, you have plenty of good things laid by for many years to come. Narcissistically, he speaks of my barn, my grain, my goods, and even my soul. Take things easy, eat, drink, have a good time. These sentiments are endorsed by Koheleth. In chapter 9 of Ecclesiastes we read, "Go, eat your bread in gladness, and drink your wine in joy." But then comes a sting in the tail. For there is no action, no reasoning, no learning, no wisdom in Sheol, where you are going. Sheol in the Hebrew scriptures, by the way, is the abode of the dead. St. Paul comments on these words from Ecclesiastes. If the dead are not going to be raised, then by all means let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we shall be dead. And that's exactly what happens in this parable. God says, "Fool, this very night the demand will be made for your soul. And this hoard of yours, whose will it be then?" Jesus spells out the lesson of the parable. So it is when someone stores up treasure for himself instead of becoming rich in the sight of God. New Testament scholar Brendan Byrne makes this observation. The parable initiates a theme that becomes very prominent in the gospel from now on. Nothing is more destructive of life and humanity than preoccupation with acquiring, holding on to, and increasing wealth. Diane Bergant offers this reflection. The rich man is not censured because of his wealth, nor is he criticised for not attending to the needs of those less fortunate than he. His foolishness is much deeper. It is the attitude of greed that underlies his actions. His life consists in amassing more and more. Prosperity has become the sole pursuit of his life. His retirement plan is a self-centered recital of, "I will, I will, I will." This rich man thinks he owns everything, crops, barns, grain, and even his own soul. In 1976, the psychoanalyst and social philosopher Erich Fromm wrote a book entitled To Have or To Be. The title describes two different attitudes to wealth and possessions. Fromm concludes that we live in a society in which the supreme goal is to have, and to have more and more. A society in which the very essence of being is having. If one has nothing, one is nothing. Fromm quotes from two poems to illustrate these two different approaches to life. In each of the poems, the poet encounters a flower. The 19th century English poet Tennyson sees a flower while taking a walk. "Flower in a crannied wall, I pluck you out of the crannies. I hold you here, root and all, in my hand." The 17th century Japanese poet Basho also sees a flower, a Nazuna, but his response is quite different. "When I look carefully, I see the Nazuna blooming by the hedge. Ah!" The difference is striking. Tennyson reacts to the flower by plucking it up, root and all. He wants to have it, to possess it. And of course, the uprooted flower will soon die. The Japanese poet's reaction to the flower is entirely different. He doesn't want to pluck it. He doesn't even touch it. He is simply transformed by the flower's beauty in a moment of ecstasy. Michael Sandel is the professor of government at Harvard University. A recent book he wrote is entitled What Money Can't Buy. In this book, he is sounding the alarm at a quiet revolution that we are living through without being consciously aware of it. He writes, "The past 3 decades have seen a quiet revolution. Without quite realizing it, without ever deciding to do so, we have drifted from having a market economy to being a market society." How can we describe this transition from having a market economy to being a market society? Sandel says that a market economy is a tool, a valuable and effective tool for organizing productive activity. A market society, however, is a place where everything is up for sale. Market values seep into every domain of human endeavour, and we end up becoming a slave to money when everything in society is up for sale. So we're living through a period of transition. The market economy, which is a valuable and effective tool for organising productive activity, is slowly becoming a market society in which everything is on sale. Everything has a price tag. Let me point to one indicator. The major code of football played in my hometown of Sydney is rugby league. Here you can see a photograph of the 1956 St George Rugby League team who won the premiership in that year. Now look at these recent photographs of St George players. Perhaps you've noticed an interesting difference in the football jerseys the players are wearing. Today's players are walking billboards. I've counted the logos of 5 sponsors on each jersey. There wasn't one sponsor logo on the 1956 jerseys. And that has given me food for thought. Should I fight against the market society, or should I take advantage of it? As Sandel reminds us, we become a slave to money when everything in society is up for sale. Clive Hamilton's book, entitled Affluenza, is subtitled "When Too Much is Never Enough." Affluenza is a coined word derived from the 2 words affluence and influenza, suggesting that our relentless pursuit of affluence has become a disease. Hamilton says that affluenza describes a condition in which we are confused about what it takes to live a worthwhile life. Part of this confusion is a failure to distinguish between what we want and what we need. It can be described as the bloated, sluggish, and unfulfilled feeling that results from efforts to keep up with the Joneses. It is a growing and unhealthy preoccupation with money and material things. We derive our identity and sense of place in the world through our consumption activity. Hamilton offers this reflection. As a rule, no matter how much money people have, they feel they need more. Why else would people in rich countries such as Australia keep striving to become richer, often at the expense of their own happiness and that of their families? Even the mega-rich seem unable to accept that they have all they need, always comparing themselves unfavourably with their neighbours. Most people cling to the belief that more money means more happiness. People rationalize it this way. I hoped that getting to this income level would make me feel contented. I do have more stuff, but it doesn't seem to have done the trick. I obviously need to set my goals higher. I'm sure I'll be happy when I'm earning an extra $10,000, because then I'll be able to buy the other things I want. Think of it this way. This is me, here and now. See the empty spaces. They represent everything that I lack. Now, here is the perfect me. Notice all the empty spaces have been filled. But how do I do that? How do I fill the emptiness? The obvious answer is, I fill the empty spaces with more stuff. However, it's not stuff that's the problem, as Hamilton points out. It is not money and material possessions that are the root of the problem. It is our attachment to them and the way they condition our thinking, give us our self-identification and rule our lives. The problem is not that people own things. The problem is that things own people. Writing hundreds of years earlier, St. John of the Cross diagnosed the same problem in these words. We are not talking here about giving up things, because that does not strip the soul if her effective drive remains set on them. We are talking about stripping away the craving for gratification, gusto, appetito in those things. That is what leaves the person free and empty in their regard, even though she still owns them. Because it is not the things of this world that take up space in the person or do her harm. No, it is the will and the hunger for them that dwells inside her. Thomas Merton made this observation. People may spend their whole lives climbing the ladder of success, only to find, once they reach the top, that the ladder is leaning against the wrong wall. Dante's great masterpiece, La Divina Commedia, was completed in 1320, a year before the poet's death at the age of 56. It is the story of a pilgrim who finds himself lost in a dark wood. To find the right way, he must first pass through hell, before climbing the mountain of purgatory and finally ascending to the heights of heaven. It is, of course, a work of fantasy, but it offers profound insights into our own quest for God. The journey begins with the Roman poet Virgil guiding Dante through the 9 circles of hell. Sinners are condemned to spend eternity in one of those 9 circles, depending upon the sin they have committed. The closer we get to circle 9, where Satan is, the more serious the sin. The sin of those in circle 2 is lust. Circle 3 is for gluttons. We, however, are interested in circle 4. Here we find those guilty of the sin of avarice. But there is also another group of sinners who share this circle of the inferno. They are the spendthrifts. So circle 4 is for hoarders and wasters, or the avaricious and the prodigals. Here we meet people who have hoarded wealth, the miserly, but we also meet those who have squandered their wealth foolishly and lavishly. The prodigal and the miserly are here in large numbers, those guilty of ill-giving and ill-keeping. Miserliness and wild spending are related aspects of the same sin. People either way are possessed by their possessions. In the inferno, the punishment fits the sin. The avaricious and the prodigal are condemned for all eternity to roll enormous weights. But the hoarders and wasters turn against each other. They smash into each other. The prodigal screaming, "Why hoard?" The avaricious screaming, "Why waste?" Seeing that their attitudes towards wealth on earth were diametrically opposed, they likewise clash in hell, endlessly rolling weights at each other. Unlike the other circles of hell, where Dante can recognize people that he had known or known about on earth, here in this fourth circle he cannot recognize a single soul. Sinners in circle 4 are deprived of their individuality. They become like the money that had enslaved them in life. One coin or banknote is just like another. The parable of the rich fool is a wake-up call. Speaking of wake-up calls, I was reading recently about the man whose photograph you can see here. On Sunday, April the 15th, 1888, he was reading the French newspaper Le Figaro. It's amazing what you can find on the internet if you know where to look. I was able to track down a copy of the very same newspaper that he was reading, Le Figaro, dated Sunday, April the 15th, 1888. Right at the bottom of column 6, the very bottom right-hand corner of page 1, was a brief article that it would have been easy to overlook. Here it is magnified. Let me translate the French for you. It reads, "A man one could hardly call a benefactor of humanity has died yesterday in Cannes." This very brief article continues over the page, and there we find out the identity of the person who has just died in Cannes, and it greatly surprised our reader. Here we are on page 2 at the top of column 1 where the name is revealed. Again, let me translate the French for you. It is Monsieur Nobel, the inventor of dynamite. Monsieur Nobel is Swedish. The gentleman reading the newspaper is Monsieur Nobel. Monsieur Nobel, the inventor of dynamite. The paper had obviously made an error. The person who had died was not Alfred Nobel, but his brother Ludwig. But when Alfred Nobel saw himself described as a man one could hardly call a benefactor of humanity, it was a wake-up call. Most of us today would associate the name of Alfred Nobel with the Nobel Prize, offered in the areas of physics, chemistry, biology, literature, and peace. Not so many of us would know that he was also the inventor of dynamite. Not all wake-up calls are as sudden, surprising, and abrupt as Nobel's. You may remember the influential journalist Malcolm Muggeridge because of the 1969 documentary he made on Mother Teresa, entitled Something Beautiful for God. Muggeridge had been an agnostic for much of his life before converting to Christianity. In 1982, at the age of 79, he was received into the Catholic Church along with his wife Kitty. This was largely under the influence of Mother Teresa. Later in his life he wrote this: "I am old, and in at most a decade or so will be dead. I am like a man on a sea voyage nearing his destination. When I embarked, I worried about having a cabin with a porthole. whether I should be asked to sit at the captain's table. Who were the more attractive and important passengers? All such considerations become pointless when I shall so soon be disembarking. In 1967, Muggeridge spent 3 weeks at the Cistercian Abbey of Nunraw in Scotland to make a television documentary about life in an enclosed religious order. He made this reflection: by all the laws of Freud and the psycho-prophets, the monks are depriving themselves of the sensual satisfactions which alone make a whole life possible. They ought to be up the wall and screaming. Actually, I found in Nunraw a quite exceptional peace. It is the children of affluence, not deprived monks, who howl and fret in psychiatric wards. The One World Trade Center in New York was built on the site of the Twin Towers that were destroyed on September the 11th, 2001. Trinity Church is close by, and if you wander through the graveyard surrounding the church, you might come across this grave. It is the grave of William and Mary Lambert and their daughter Mary. There is a verse on the tombstone worth pondering. Stop, passenger, as you pass by. As you are now, so once was I. As I am now, you soon must be. Prepare for death and follow me. When the Greek writer and journalist Nikos Kazantzakis was a young man, he interviewed an elderly monk who lived on Mount Athos. Kazantzakis asked the monk, "Do you still struggle with the devil?" The monk replied, "No." But he went on to explain, "I used to, but I've grown old and tired, and the devil has grown old and tired with me. Now I leave him alone, and he leaves me alone." Somewhat bemused by this reply, Kazantzakis then asked, "So your life is easy now? No more struggles?" "Ah, no," replied the monk. "It's worse. Now I struggle with God." Our struggling with the devil is essentially a struggle with the untamed energies of youth, coming to terms with our sexuality and the quest for intimacy, getting married and raising a family, buying a house and paying off the mortgage, educating our children, enjoying a comfortable lifestyle, establishing a career and planning for an enjoyable retirement. But this struggle can leave us feeling empty and dissatisfied. Is this all there is, we ask? We must therefore take to heart the words of Jesus in today's Gospel. So it is when someone stores up treasure for himself instead of becoming rich in the sight of God.